Hello, Good Tree. This is Pastor BJ, here to answer some questions that you might have regarding creation according to the Bible. So we're going through the book called the New Answers Book, volume number 1, which looks like this on the image. Or if you haven't picked up a book yet, go ahead and do so. The book has 25 questions and 25 answers, and we're going through this book in order to prepare for our trip to the Creation Museum and the Ark encounter. The more we are informed, the better our time will be, the more we will learn at our trip. So the first question is there really a God? Is there really a God? Very important question that we sometimes get asked by our non-believing friends. So in order to answer this question, this book divides itself into several smaller questions leading into answer this question of chapter number 1, is there really a God? God, an eternal and uncreated being. Who is this God who is supposedly an eternal being, uncreated, uncaused being? Because we know just by observing the world that nothing that exists was uncaused. Something caused it to happen. So when we talk about God who created all things, people who deny the existence of God, they say then who created God? Right? How did God come into existence? Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 starts with the saying, "In the beginning, God." So God is outside the time, and because He is outside the concept of time that we're living in, He was able to create time. He is outside time. He is eternal with no beginning and end, and He knows all things. He is intelligent. He is all-knowing, all-powerful God. Okay. So how do you recognize the evidence of intelligence? If the world was created by an intelligence, which we would call Him God, how do we recognize the evidence? We recognize the evidence because we see design. Design implies that there is a designer, which means intelligence, which we call God again. Like when we see the Great Wall of China or U.S. Capitol building in Washington D.C., the Opera House in Sydney, Australia, Mount Rushmore, all those faces that are carved on the side of the mountain. When we see those things, we do not think that these things just kind of came into being on its own. We always think of the designer because of the design. We always think of the intelligence because of the design. So when we observe the living things, not the things that people created with their hands, but when we observe our bodies and all the natural things in the nature, we see an incredible, precise, and beautiful design in the world. So we automatically have to assume, if you're a logical thinking being, we have to assume that there is an intelligence behind this because we see designs everywhere. So people might be convinced that there is some kind of a designer because of the design that people observe in the world. So the next question is, who or what is the designer then? Okay, so we believe, according to the Bible, Genesis chapter 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And we also read from Colossians chapter 1 verse 16 that all things were created that are in heaven and are in earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through Him and for Him, Him being Jesus. All things were created through Jesus and for Jesus. Okay. The evolutionists, right, the people who believe in, the scientists or anyone who believes in evolution, they say that the world was created through means of natural selection, basically start from a single cell and over millions and billions of years mutated into some kind of a design. So there's purely by automatic and unconscious and rather an accidental process. So people like Richard Dawkins is a big proponent of evolutionistic, evolution science, and they're saying it's a gradual step by step transformation from simple being to the most complicated design that we see in the world, which is absurd to think that could happen. And I think that's it requires even a greater faith to believe in natural selection creating all the things that we see in the world. But since it's being argued, does natural selection produce design? We can observe DNA. We discovered DNA not too long ago in 20th century. DNA essentially is a system of language. By the way, language implies intelligence. So life is built on information, and the information is found in the DNA. So when we argue that the natural selection produces design, that means matter produced information. Okay, the single cell somehow produced information, creating all these things. But if we can see that it does not happen that way, we don't observe it in the world. That there's not even one instance did matter produce information. Actually, if there was an interview, and the question was asked to Richard Dawkins. He gets mentioned quite a bit in this book, but a question was asked to Richard Dawkins. Asked him, "Have you ever seen scientifically observed of a matter producing information?" And he couldn't give you one instance, but his entire philosophy, his entire theory, or scientific philosophy, is built on the basis that the matter could produce, and have produced information. Okay, I think that's a huge blind faith that he has on evolution. Okay, so if natural selection cannot produce new information, then can mutation produce new information? Can genes mutate to create new information? We don't. We don't observe that in the world. We do see mutations from time to time, but mutation, in the evidences that we observed, or the examples that we observed of mutation, is when something loses information, and the losing information causes mutation. Okay, it makes total sense because God created this world in a certain way and into perfection, and when time passed because of this fallen world with pollution and all these things, and as time passed by, we lost information in reproduction. And because of that, we have mutations. There's never an instance where, like X-Men, the movie, where mutation created like wings on people, or kind of ability to do something that we couldn't do before. There's never a new information added, even through the mutation process. Then, can random chance create new information, create information? Okay, if the natural selection does not prove, there's no proof of information arising from natural selection nor mutation, then can information arise from non-information? Basically, like if you have random letters in a hat, and you just draw out random letters one at a time, can you eventually have enough coherent words to fill up an encyclopedia? That's an absurd too. Some people might say, oh, with enough time and enough tries, we can have information from non-information, information from this chaotic pile of letters. But if we began with non-information, how can we know that a word is a word? How can we know that a certain word has some kind of meaning? If it came from a non-information, that's just not possible. And you can read the the example of this experiment in this book in chapter verse 19. So, but it's just absurd to think that not information could arise from a non-information, a collection of just random, chaotic material. So then, if natural selection doesn't produce information, and mutation does not produce new information, and non-information cannot produce information, then what causes information? And we have to go to the Bible. It says, in the beginning, God created all things, and the God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present, who is outside time, who is outside space, who knows all things, then we have to believe that this God created information which caused the matters to be produced, and God did everything at once. It's not absurd to think that. It's actually more absurd to think that natural selection produced this complicated design, or mutation produced complicated design, or non-information produced information, and calling that science, because we don't observe that ever in the world of science. We never see that happening in the real world. Okay. So then, do people really ask who created God? Of course they do. People ask who created God. Even all this argument, all the reasoning and logical argument, people still ask who created God. But God is uncaused. Okay, if everything that we see has a cause, and we say, oh, God also has a cause, then God is then part of this world. God is limited to this world because he could not have come to being on his own. But what we know in the Bible is that he is a self-existent one. He's outside time, and he's the one who created time. He's beyond all things material, and because the people have problem with this, because once we recognize that God created the world, then we must be accountable to him, okay? Because God owns the world. He designed it, he created it, he owns it, he rules it, he is the king. And the thing is, people do not want to be subjects of God. They don't want to bow down to the king. They want to be their own kings, and that's why they deny the existence of God, even though the evidence is overwhelming. So how do we know that the Creator is the God of the Bible that the Christians believe? That's a great question, actually. The book it will go into more in depth later, but what I say usually is this: we look at Jesus. Okay, Jesus was a historical person who roamed the earth in about 2,000 years ago, and he died and he was resurrected. If we believe in his resurrection, which we can also logically, with enough evidence and logical argument, can conclude that the resurrection actually did happen, then if Jesus is the true Son of God who died on the cross and who was resurrected, then everything that he talks about, everything that he refers to, it must be true. And Jesus, the Bible testifies about Jesus. So the Bible must be true, and the God of the Bible is the God who created the heavens and the earth. And that's it. I didn't want to take too much time, but this is it for the chapter 1. This is just a quick summary of chapter 1. I'd like you to go ahead and read the book. It's very interesting. It's very informative, and I want you to read it and have the answers to yourselves. Till next time.